This meeting is now being recorded.
Okay. Can everyone see my screen okay? The slideshow, it says Quality IFSC Outcomes Assessment Updates and Training.
Yes.
Okay, good. So first off, I want to start by thanking everyone for working so hard on the QIO testing and giving us such great feedback. We're really excited about the final product and definitely wouldn't have the same quality without your guys' help, so thank you. And with that, today we're going to go over the Phase 2 testing results, the assessor feedback, and then the updates that we made based on your feedback, some clarifications and examples. We'll talk about what's next, and then have a Q&A at the end. So the objectives of Phase 2 testing were to increase the number of same answers between CCB and state ratings, decrease the rating difference between our scores in each section, enhance the user experience and make the tool easier to use, and then receive feedback to finalize the tool. So we'll start by looking at the difference in scores between the two phases of testing. So the purple is phase 1 and the green is phase 2. And we're looking at the difference in scores in each section. So we can see that the purple to green, the green is smaller. So that means that our difference between scores has decreased, and that's what we're looking for. That's especially true on the IFSC outcome section. We were seeing a difference in 1.5 between the CCB scores and the state scores, and that's a significant amount since we're on a 5-point scale. And in phase 2 testing, that went all the way down to about 0.5 difference. So that means the tool is doing what we want it to do, and we're getting closer scores, which is great. So now we'll look at phase 2 testing by itself. And these pie charts are showing who scored higher when we didn't get the same score. So the goal is that purple. That means that the CCB and state scored the same on that section. The blue is when the CCB scored higher, and the green is when the state scored higher. So we're doing pretty good on the family assessment and global outcomes. And then the IFSP outcomes, we can see the CCB scored higher quite a bit, and then that's affecting the overall quality score. So we'll just try to increase that purple and get the same scores more often. So next we'll break it down by section of the QIO and IFSP. So this shows how many times each rating was used. So for example, if we look at that those first bars for not acceptable, it shows that the self-assessment CCB used that score 11 times, and the state used that score 15 times. So CCBs are scoring emerging best practice and somewhat acceptable slightly more often than the state, and then the state is scoring not acceptable slightly more often than the CCBs. And then we're scoring acceptable equally. So that's looking pretty good. This next one shows the global outcomes section, and we're scoring very similarly here, which is great. The state's just scoring a little bit more not acceptable, while the CCB is scoring a little bit more somewhat acceptable.
Oh, this is Amanda. I just want to jump in on that one, Ashley. And I think in talking to Lenita and her team, the fact that we're scoring and we're showing similar scores and we're seeing that even the higher rating in the global outcomes, I think is really good for us to see, knowing that really has been the work that you've been doing on, kind of developing those global outcomes, integrating your processes. So that one is a way to go, everyone.
Yes. And then this next one is the IFSP outcomes section. And this is where we're seeing the most difference between CCB scores and the state verification. CCBs are scoring acceptable much more often, while the state is scoring somewhat acceptable much more often. And because this section is broken out into multiple subsections, there's a lot more room for errors, so it makes sense that we're seeing this. And we'll go over some clarifications and some things to keep in mind when rating this section to try to help lower that difference in scores.
Ashley, this is Lenita. Are you thinking that one of the reasons for the discrepancy in scores for the IFSP outcomes is that there are more criterion on there, like the global outcomes, it's a little bit tighter and not as much?
Yeah, definitely. It's because it is broken out into those subsections on that page, there's more check boxes, which leads to more room for varying answers.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Yeah. And then this last one here shows the breakdown of exact overall quality ratings that were given. So, for example, if we look at those first bars, it shows that the CCBs gave an overall quality rating of 0 2 times, and the state gave an overall quality rating of 0 3 times. We can see the biggest discrepancy is in that 0.3 to 0.7 range. So CCBs are rating closer to somewhat acceptable, while the state's rating closer to not acceptable. And then we see a similar difference between the 1.3 and 2 range. So CCBs are rating closer to acceptable, while the state's rating closer to somewhat acceptable. And again, that's largely impacted by the IFSP outcomes discrepancies. So as we work towards more comfortability with rating that section, we'll see these scores get closer together. So now we'll kind of shift gears. So if anyone has any questions on the results, now is a good time to ask those, or we can do it at the end if you need some more time to process.
And we have everyone unmuted, so if you want to ask a question or type it in, either way.
Hi, this is Kelly from North Metro, and I'm just wondering, I know not for this call and this purpose, but I'm wondering if you have it by CCB that you can share with us individually.
We do have that information. We don't have it organized into this format, but we can definitely do that and send it out if that's useful.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. I know that I think this is coming towards the end as well, as far as feedback and what will be useful, and Ashley will get into that as well of what will be meaningful for you in the data that you get back.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
And we realize this is it's a pretty small N that we're starting with here. And so as we go on and we do more assessment and we get a bigger N, that's going to impact these results.
Definitely. Because we had 28 was our N, so that was the total number. So, one slight difference can drastically impact.
Although it feels like a lot right now. 28 IFSPs feels like a lot. I don't know how you guys feel, but that's what we think.
Yes. Okay, well, if there aren't any other questions right now, we'll move on to discussing each section of the QIO and the updates that were made, and then some clarifications that will be helpful. So if you have questions or outstanding suggestions that you don't see addressed, go ahead and type them in there, or just comment as we're on that slide. So we'll start with the introduction page, and the only update to this page was adding in the links to the IFSP, Unicorn, and QIO user guide. Next is the demographic information. So we've added 2 fields to this one. We've added the age at IFSP development, and then we've also included a calculation tool to get that age, where you enter the date of birth and then the IFSP meeting date, and it will give you the age at IFSP development. And then we've also included an area to check the area of delay, so that those can be referenced throughout the assessment. And this is what that section now looks like. And then on the family assessment section, we've added this scoring reminders box to all sections. And as you can see, we've typed in the area of delay and the age at IFSP. So where it says type 366, 368, that will be whatever the assessor has put in on the previous page so that you can remember those things as you're going through. And then we also included ICER as a reminder and what that stands for. And then one other update to this page is we added a checkbox to the not acceptable column to address limited routines. So it says, does not include enough routines to visualize what this child and family's day looks like. Because we were noticing that we had some great information, but it was limited based on the number of routines that were listed. And then on the global outcomes section, we've added a checkbox in the acceptable column that says concerns and priorities are represented throughout the strengths and needs. And then for clarifications, there's a checkbox that says strengths and needs only contains new information not previously gathered. And that word only is very black and white, and there was some confusion. I had it myself when I was using the tool over if I saw new information, does that mean that I need to check that box? And that's not the case. It's only if it has new information. So if we see some previously gathered information and some new information, that's what we would expect, and that's acceptable. And there was also some question around age anchoring and how to identify when it is present. And this refers to the global outcomes rating. So we want to see some of that verbiage in the how does your child's development relate to his or her same age peers infused into the strengths and needs. So some examples of that would be beginning to or occasional use of, so that's what we're looking for there. And then also a reminder that the calculations for somewhat acceptable through best practice disappear if you check any missing required information. And that's just a visual reminder that you cannot rate that section higher than, or you have to rate that section not acceptable if it's missing any required information. And then the comments box is for your reference, so you can use that to note specific areas of excellence or concern, and then we can use it for that same purpose. And that will be something to pay attention to as you get your results emailed to you, and see if there's anything that you want to follow up on internally, or if you're noticing any trends, that's a good place to note that. Next is the IFSP outcomes page. So the first update, the only update, we broke out what is the priority this outcome will address into its own section. And we mainly want to capture that the priority is directly pulled from your family priorities.
And we thought this might be helpful because it really just aligns to every single section in the ISSP. This one was, we had it kind of built into the number 1 section. So this should align pretty nicely as you're going through and rating the IFSP outcome section.
And then clarifications on this page. We received feedback that a checkbox should be added to not acceptable for the IFSP outcome not being related to a routine. And we do have a checkbox in acceptable that covers that. It says an observable action or behavior is described to show progress and the desired change in routine. So because we're using a rubric, unlike a Likert scale, we don't have a checkbox accounting for each level of a certain criteria. So if we were to remove everything else and just look at the acceptable column, that's what we want to see. So there's less criteria in acceptable because at this point it's easier to call out what's missing using our rubric. And we can consider making changes to this in the future, which might make sense as we start seeing scores closer to the best practice acceptable range. And then also, go ahead.
Can I ask a clarifying question? So sometimes when we're at an IFSP, the family will say their concern or their priority is they just want them to talk more or they just want them to increase vocabulary. Is that still considered to be on the not acceptable?
So, Sarah, I think what we're looking for is that is, we're using this term threaded throughout the process. So we want to make sure that we have seen how that was impacting the child's day during the family assessment. So if they're saying that and we see that that's clearly impacting their day, then I think it's fine. But if they're saying that, but when you had gone through the family assessment, there's nothing there about talking more, whatever you said.
Right.
Then we wouldn't, that would be not acceptable.
Okay. Thank you.
And Sarah, this is Amanda. Just to add in on that, I think, as we're looking at it, Ashley and I are rating these, and we haven't been part of the family assessment, but we really use that information to help guide kind of get an idea of how that conversation went to try to put ourselves in the home at that point. It is helpful if in that piece, in the priorities and concerns, if you are reflecting back on, mom and dad both report that this is the area they want to focus on most significantly, and they really are they clearly have stated that they want him to talk more. And if it's worded in a way like that, that tells us a little bit more about parents, that's what they said. When we just see communication and we know that maybe that's what mom or dad or whoever the caregiver has said that, from our perspective of looking at this, third hand, that is really helpful.
Okay. Thank you.
And this is Lenita, and I think as we move forward and we increase support and training and technical assistance on family assessment and conversational interviewing is really getting skilled at pulling that back when a family does say that about what's really going to change if this child simply talks. What's that going to look like during your day? What part of the day is really impacted by that right now, and how can we support you with that? So I think that's where we sometimes as service coordinators get shut down.
Right.
Is, okay, the family doesn't want to go on, I don't want to push it. But I think that's part of our role in the service coordination role is to help them identify that.
Right.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
And then also, just as a reminder, we're only reviewing one IFSP outcome at this time. And since we're only looking at initials, we've also removed the review of outcome subsection for the time being. And we'll look at adding that back in because eventually we'll be looking at the reviews of these initials.
That's your opportunity to yell hooray.
Oh, no one did. I'll say hooray for you because that's what we have to read too.
All right, so next is the strategies section. So we've added a couple of check boxes here.
Yay.
We've added one to not acceptable to ensure that strategies are aligning with the outcome. Then we've also added an item to not acceptable to address when strategies are only written as services or provider. And then some clarifications here. So we received that feedback on the difficulty of writing individualized strategies when the provider is just meeting the family for the first time. And we definitely agree that strategies will probably become more individualized as the family spends more time with the provider. But we should be able to make some individualized strategies if we've done a thorough family assessment. And it's also okay to have a mixture, maybe a couple general recommendations that align with the family's priority and the IFSP outcome, in addition to some individualized strategy. So we've added only to that checkbox item. So it says only general recommendations. So that word only we'll be seeing a lot. So we'll pay attention to that because it is black and white. And then the same goes for interest, preferences, and available items. So as long as we're collecting thorough information in the family assessment, we should be able to write strategies that are based on those specific needs. And one example of that would be if we have a strategy of walking up and down the stairs, we could change it to walking up and down the stairs on the family's back patio and just incorporating in those things that we know about the family.
And I think over time, as we're reviewing more IFSPs and they're provider specific or service coordinator specific, and you're seeing patterns where every single time a provider is part of this IFSP, you see the same strategy over and over again. That to me is what we're after, is that would be more of a concern than if we see consistent strategies that we would expect for a given concern.
All right, so next are 3A, 3B, and 3C, which is where are you starting, how will you know when the IFSP outcome is achieved, and the global outcome addressed. So the first update, and only, I keep thinking we have multiple, is we changed the verbiage on the global outcomes to most closely aligned instead of correct global outcomes. And then some other clarifications. Again, we have that word only in where are you starting. Only contains new information. And again, it's okay to have a mixture of some new and some previously gathered information. We just don't want to see only new information. And then there were also some questions on how to determine if a timeline is missing on the global outcomes and selecting the most closely aligned global outcome. So we broke that out into some examples. So the timeline is missing. Here's an example of one that's missing a timeline. We will know he can do this when he begins using some words or gestures to let mom know what he wants. And then here's an example of a similar outcome with a timeline. Mom will know what book he would like to read at bedtime when he points at the book or uses a word associated with the book 3 times per week.
Do you, any questions on that, or do you see in that where we built that timeline into the original outcome? Everyone's good on that?
Okay. Well, next we're going to get your input and try to make this one measurable and with a timeline. So it was
group participation.
When child is tired or mad/frustrated, he will replace tantrum with a word to communicate that feeling or emotion. So we need to build that into a routine, and typically we'd pull that from the family assessment, but we can just make an assumption since we don't have that in front of us. So what routine would you guys like to use?
You can either yell it out or type it in, but we're looking for this one. How do we build that routine in, and what routine?
So bedtime.
Yay, bedtime. Great. And then next we want to consider the intention or the function of the outcome. And I think that we can gather that from what we already have. Does anyone have an idea what the family's trying to achieve?
We'll give you guys a second to think on it. Do you feel like the function's already there?
Yes, use a word.
would agree with that. Okay.
Yeah, I think. And what is the function of using the word? So using the word to maybe let mom or dad know what he's feeling. Okay. Next is observable behavior. So we want to call out specifically what behavior the family would like to see. And I think that kind of ties into what you've already said. Using the word as the behavior, and then to let his parents know how he's feeling is the function. And now we want to give a measurable criteria. So how often do we want to see this behavior?
So these last two pieces, I mean, we're looking for anyone, and it's okay, you're not going to be wrong if you throw something out, but these last two in particular is definitely where we're seeing, like, these are being left off. So we wanted to call them out, and we kind of put that the little hint in there of how, that the measurable criteria is how often. So I'm going to throw that out to you guys again. How do we pull that out, the measurable criteria in?
And I can go back to this previous slide if that's a helpful example.
Hi, this is Kelly. I think that sometimes that's hard because when you get to like how often or when you're going to see that, a lot of times parents will say all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I think, again, supporting them and backing up and knowing where we're starting. So, if the child is never doing this, thinking about baby steps. So, we know that it takes at least a couple weeks to get something going. And so, talking about, 3 times a week or, having a beginning point, knowing where we're starting from is going to be important.
Okay.
And I think I'd just add to that, Lenita, it's really a matter of if you said all the time and thinking of that from a parent's perspective, then if he doesn't do it all the time, one, we don't want them to be discouraged by the progress that's there. If maybe it's 6 out of 7 days a week, and then they're really caught up on well, he's just still not doing it all the time. And then thinking of the course of a parent's frantic day, for them to maybe be able to look at one point in time, and then when you come back the next time and have that conversation, they can very, very clearly think back to a specific point that they can say, yep, I know they got it. So really helping the parent to break that down into the course of their own schedules and routines.
What did I say? Get it out.
Yeah. Oh, okay. And then we have another one that Emily had typed in an example, and maybe I'll read it out and then see if everyone agrees that this might be a good example. I know a different routine, but that's still good because we don't know which one we were talking about. During mealtime, Billy will use a word or gesture to let mom know that he wants something else to eat or is done eating. He will do this during one meal a day for 2 weeks.
What do you guys think of that one?
Well, I feel like Emily's going to say, yeah, it's great.
But it's very clear for the family. They're going to know when that occurs.
Yeah.
And I think you could even be more specific if it's already going to be hard for the family with, just at breakfast time or just at lunchtime. Because we want to give the family a way to easily kind of see progress and know, rather than making it really open-ended.
Right, and those are things that you can get from learning about the family's day through the family assessment. So you can either say, well, I know breakfast is really hard for you. Maybe this is a time you want to see that. Or I know lunch is really good for you. So let's work on it during this, seeing if we're seeing it during this time so we can build on that. So there's a lot of different ways you can do that depending on what the family says and about their times of day.
Yeah.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you. Oh, we didn't call that out because we had a conversation.
And then, lastly, which ties into what Wayla was just saying, that we always want to write it from the family's perspective. So what's going to make that IFSP outcome most meaningful for the family? Are there any other questions on writing IFSP outcomes, making them measurable, applying a timeline?
And this is a way that I just have a comment about writing these outcomes within a routine. That's going to really help to minimize just having those domain-specific routines, because you're going to be able to incorporate different types of domains within that outcome, because it's based on a time of day rather than just communication or motor or whatever.
Great. So next is selecting global outcomes. So we're noticing that multiple global outcomes are often selected for one IFSP outcome. And keep in mind that we're looking for the global outcome that most closely aligns with that IFSP outcome. And on rare occasions, an outcome might align with multiple global outcomes, but that shouldn't be the norm, which is what we're seeing now. So to pick the global outcome that most closely aligns, you can consider that function of the outcome like we talked about on the last slide. So in this example, mom would like her child to let her know when he wants a drink. That's the function of that IFSP outcome. So the global outcome that most closely aligns is taking appropriate action to meet needs. And the one that we're seeing tagged on a lot is acquiring and using knowledge and skills. So while that might be important for him to learn how to say drink or milk, that isn't what the intent of this outcome is. And then here's an example of when acquiring and using knowledge and skills would be the global outcome that most closely aligns. Child will label 5 new foods by name during lunchtime when he attends child care 3 days per week. So the function of this outcome is for the child to label foods, and there's no reference to getting needs met, so that's why that one makes the most sense here. Are there any questions on that?
And I think the reason Ashley had put these two together is that the taking appropriate action to meet needs and acquiring and using knowledge and skills, those are the ones that we're seeing grouped together most often. And it typically, and even aligns in some way similarly to this outcome that she has here, that it has to do with maybe, they are learning a new word that they have to say, or using signs, gestures, and however they're indicating that, that we know that they need to learn that in order to meet this outcome. But just to follow up what Ashley said, that you're really looking at what's the intent of the outcome. What is mom going to be able to look and see? What is their little, somebody said Billy, I'll use Billy again. Billy is going to do. So what are they doing? And that's how you're aligning it with that global outcome.
Right, and you can thread it backwards, so you can work your way backward and see, is there commonality between, okay, I chose taking appropriate action to meet needs here when I'm looking at this, and is it linking back to the concerns and priorities, the IFSP, that outcome that was developed? Do I see linkage in the family assessment? Is there, evidence of this as part of the evaluation information? So you should see that clearly all the way through, and that's going to really help you with the intent part.
Any comments or thoughts on that? Does that help? I know because that came up as I think we saw that maybe more than once. Someone had commented on that as well, that it may be appropriate to have more than one, but does that help clarify? It's okay to say no, but yes or no, does that help?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Okay, good. We just want to make sure that if we need to keep going into more detail, we don't want to if we're good.
Okay, so we'll move on to the last page of the QIO, which is the overall quality score. So the rating scale and a breakdown of each section score has been added to the last page for reference, and that was a great idea. That was based on your feedback. So this helps the assessor tie that overall rating score to the scale and see the breakdown by section. And that's what that looks like. So are there any outstanding questions or feedback on the updates to the tool?
Or maybe suggestions that you had put out that we even haven't addressed or you didn't see that we made those changes?
Okay. Well, you can always email those to me, or we'll talk about, we made a chatter group so you can post them in there if you think of things later. And we can make warranted updates to the tool at any time. So definitely reach out if anything comes to mind. So now we'll talk about what's next and kind of the timeline for the implementation of the tool. So the second Monday of each month, and this will start next Monday, April 10th, you'll receive IFSP samples to self-assess, and you can decide how to get these completed and distribute them internally, but the assessor does need to have be in a supervising role, and there should be some training provided internally to anyone that's completing those assessments. And we're working on a standardized training for the future to assist with that. But in the meantime, let us know if you need anything to be able to do that.
So just for clarification, Ashley, when you say IFSP samples, so our office will pull a representative amount of IFSPs that are CCB specific for that supervisor to review.
That's right.
That's what you're talking about,
yes.
Right? And that's based on CCB size.
Mm-hmm.
You have that, yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
So we'll send a specific list, and you'll self-assess all the IFSP numbers listed on that list. And it's very important that you don't assess any IFSPs outside of that list at this time. We're trying to be really structured in how we gather and share that information, and we want it to be meaningful. So that's why it's important that we only get the data for our random sample that we are pulling for those.
And then I'll follow up and add on and say that again, because you will have a link for your CCB. And we're really excited for you to self-assess and start moving on the, maybe eventually getting to, reviewing as many as you want. If you're looking at improving service coordinators, IFSPs, and you want it to be a training tool, we agree with that. We like that idea, and we want to get there. But at this point, we want to ensure that the tool is helping and providing you that type of support, and we're able to kind of reflect back on our data that we're seeing an improvement, and then in the future of looking at maybe the entire IFSP and supporting you and how else we could use this type of tool if it's not the same, and looking at maybe changing it. But it is really important that the link only stays within the person that it's being provided to, and those that you identify that can self-assess. So keep it contained and focused on the samples that'll be sent out.
And just remember too that any thing that you do submit automatically goes into the data results that we're pulling from. So we want to make sure that that's limited to those ones that we're sending out. And then assessments will be due 2 weeks after they're sent out, so that's the fourth Monday of every month, and that starts April 24th. And the number of assessments to complete will be dependent on the size of your CCB and how many IFSPs have been completed that month. So small CCBs could have anywhere from 1 to 2, while the larger CCBs could have 20 to 30 or a little bit more. But despite this, the workload should be equal amongst all assessors because we're assuming that the supervisory capacity is increasing as the CCB size increases. So therefore more people that can self-assess.
And we do recognize when there's changes or if you have significant turnover and maybe your supervisory capacity does decrease. I would say to you that either reach out to Ashley or myself if you are finding that that's a challenge given the number of self-assessments that are required. But at this point, we do think that it should be manageable, that we know that the structures that you have right now and what the hierarchy looks like right now at your CCB, but just stay in communication with us because that's going to be the biggest piece of, can the timeline shift? Is the sample on an ongoing basis just too large? But right now, because we're also focused only on initials, I think we'll be able to ramp up or move down as needed.
Yeah, don't panic. This is a starting point.
Yes. So then the first of the month, results will be distributed for 2 months prior. So you'll receive results June 1st for these April assessments that you're completing. And we're still finalizing how those results will look. And we also want to get your input for what's going to be meaningful and useful for you. So if anyone wants to call that out here, or I'm also going to post something in the chatter so that you can give that feedback. And then we're also going to be sharing results with the Program Initiatives Unit for training purposes. And that will also be done in a very structured way, similar to why we want to contain the assessments to our sample list, just to make sure that we're keeping everything structured and can do everything in a meaningful way. And then as Amanda said, an individual tool will be distributed to each CCB, and you'll be able to access it with a password. So we'll send your first list of sample IFSPs, your link, and the password by Monday, April 10th. And then remember, you just need to hit submit, and we receive the results, and that's all you need to do for each of those.
So Ashley, can you share with us how this information is going to be shared? So you did state it'll be shared with the Program Initiatives Unit, but how else are we going to use this data that we're collecting? So like within CDHS, as part of our, state systemic improvement plan, like when do we anticipate that we will start sharing data?
Go ahead. I don't know. Amanda might be able to speak better to the timeline, but I definitely know that it will be part of our ongoing ESSIC work and assessing quality and being able to put a measurement to that and just kind of moving in the direction of quality, which we haven't been able to do before.
And Ashley's correct on that piece. That we were moving into our kind of passing the torch from Lanita's team of working in, kind of the entire go for it process of now we're looking at that evaluation as part of our ESSIC. And I know we've talked about that from the start of this really turning over and how do we measure that, looking at that implementation. Has it been successful as it relates to quality? And that's really what we're looking at ultimately of how, we're building that into the IFSPs, into the outcomes. Is it meaningful for the families, for the children, and are they meeting those outcomes? We will start to be able to look at, are we seeing a higher rate of children meeting their outcomes? Do we end up seeing that there's more children that complete their IFSPs before they exit at age 3 because they're, at developmentally equivalent to their same age peers? So we're going to look at that piece. And that'll be ongoing. At this point, we won't be sharing out that data specifically to OSEP but it will be part of our SSIP. We're already included, I think, the report of how we are working through this. We've included some of our information about the phase 1 and phase 2 testing, so we reported that out. Additionally, we will be reporting this data to CDHS. So on a monthly basis, we do report this specific measurement now that we're looking at the total quality scores and specifically at the quality of those IFSP outcomes. So we're reporting that monthly as well. And then back to you, we're going to want your feedback on what will be meaningful for CCBs to see on the progress of their quality outcomes and that total quality score. At this point, we're not including it in performance profiles. It's not being in any way looking at monitoring in that aspect. Right now, we're really just looking at that first step of this being a new activity. And are we starting to see a difference in that quality by use of the tool and that ongoing training? Because we have so specific statements within our rubric, it really helps us to identify what areas there may be training that's needed or additional support from Lanita's team to improve the overall quality of those ISSPs.
So we're really looking to the CCBs to tell us what they need in terms of, would it be helpful for you to, like Kelly requested, CCB specific information? Do you want that alongside, well, where are we performing in terms of the rest of the state? CCB is a similar size, so we'll have the flexibility to support you in that and ultimately support your own training and technical assistance. That's what we're hoping.
Yep. And I definitely want to emphasize what Amanda said, that at this point, the intended use for the tool is just training and quality improvement, and it's not being used as a monitoring procedure or anything like that. So we're hoping to see the difference between self-assessment, your scores, and our verification decrease, and see quality increase. And right now, that's all that we're really looking at in addition to the training needs. And then this is just a visual schedule of the activities that are involved in the QIO. And as a CCB, your only responsibility is that third one down, completing the self-assessment. So you have 2 weeks each month to get those done, and then you'll receive results the first day of 2 months following. So with that, are there any additional questions, suggestions, concerns?
What's the overall feeling? Excited? Nervous? Anyone want to say?
I'm nervous.
What about it is making you feel nervous?
I think it's just daunting right now because we don't know how long it's going to take or what it's, the time frame is what's making me the most nervous. But I think it will be fine once we get in a groove of how long it takes and as it gets easier.
Yeah, and I think Ashley and I both agree with you as well, because once, I think we've named it internally Manic Mondays for us because we have something falling on pretty much every Monday of the month as it relates to this QIO with the self-assessment verification. So for you just get to do those self-assessments and keep it going. But I think you're absolutely right on. It really is a matter of, this is another change, another new process, and it's a matter of just doing it and getting in a routine. And, over the course of time, because it's new, we really don't know what to expect. If we, are we going to see really consistent information over the course of a couple months and then we, wow, okay, that's telling us a lot. Maybe we change it. So, we want to do this in a systematic way, but at the same time, we are taking that information as we go. We're not locking it into a certain period of time to say we have to get to this point and then we can make a change. So it's going to be important that we keep that communication if we're feeling like, wow, it's not falling into a routine, or it is feeling like it's just taking more time than it needs to. But I think what we're hoping is that if we see that quality increase, the amount of time maybe will decrease in the completion of the tool because you'll just be able to look through and pull out all those acceptables and emerging best practices. So I think it's a matter of use of the tool and then communicating back to your teams, giving that feedback because you will be receiving in an email the confirmation and all of that information from the tool you use. So you'll have that to access as well. But I think we can probably commiserate in just being nervous and moving forward with this. And I think part of that is nervous excitement of starting this and finally getting going.
And we definitely want to keep that line of communication open. It is a new process, and if this timeline doesn't feel feasible based on the number of assessors that you have and the IFSPs that you're receiving, definitely communicate that to us so we can try to troubleshoot and help it become more manageable.
And then I think and I don't know if we didn't have this on a slide or built into this process in particular, but maybe just informally, Ashley, maybe we'll reach out to each of the CCBs and just get a sense of how many people and supervisors, leads, however you define them in your own CCB, will be completing and working on this tool. So just not that we don't want to manage that process at all. That's for you to determine who will be completing the QIO self-assessment. But it might be helpful just as we're distributing, if we had maybe misinterpreted your structure, that we had thought you had multiple supervisors and it really is only one. And that's, more particularly for the medium and larger CCBs. But that may be helpful for both of us to have a sense of, who on your teams will be working on these self-assessments.
Well, and I think also that one of the things that we're hoping that CCBs gain from this is learning opportunities. And so if maybe you did think that you would take this on completely in isolation as a supervisor, it may be a really great learning opportunity for a lead service coordinator, for example, to really support the identification of quality practices to build some capacity within your CCB for this.
Any other feelings?
Oh, do you guys have any ideas of what might be helpful resources for your internal training if you're needing to train other people to do these assessments?
We are going to be offering training throughout the summer for the cohort that's coming up. And so if there are folks that need to hop on to a training, we could accommodate that, right, Ashley?
Yeah, absolutely.
No, the QIO training.
I'll throw the question out there then. Do you feel like what you have right now, so the QIO user guide, and the webinars, your own experience in doing this, that you feel prepared to train others and that's going to kind of meet the need right now?
Yeah.
Is that for everyone? And if it isn't, that's I think what Ashley is wanting to gather is, should we provide kind of sooner rather than later and try to make that a priority of a more kind of structured training? You can type it into the chat.
Or reach out to Ashley individually.
Yeah,
and I'll send I'll invite everyone on this call to that chatter group, which right now is specific to people that will be assessing. So also let me know if anyone else needs to be added to that group, and that will be a good place to share those concerns or needs.
Sharon, we are surprised that you're on the call and excited today. Are there others that we should be reaching out to? So Kidron and is it Carmelita that we should be reaching out to around this?
Well, they convinced me to semi-retire, I'm here part-time on a month-to-month basis. So they lost full-time case manager, so they're really waiting to hire someone. Carmelita left. So I'm really the only one who knows what I do know about early intervention right now.
Oh, dear.
So for the time being, you're stuck with me.
Well, we're thrilled.
I think we're happy sad for you.
I hope they're making it worthwhile for you.
Well, I think so, at least for now. It's nice to be able to focus just on early intervention. So.
Oh gosh, that's great.
So that's been a really nice change. So.
Well, welcome back.
Yeah, and I left a phone message for Kidron today, not knowing that, Sharon, so I can disregard, I guess.
I just wanted to surprise you, Layla.
Great surprise.
Thank you.
Then I think for the piece, just to follow up with Ashley, she looking for that feedback on what will be useful for your CCBs. I know during phase 1 we had sent out kind of that breakout of each area, how you're performing, similar to what we showed today, but on that CCB breakout. We'll just, I think, like Ashley said, this in the chatter, maybe putting out more specific needs that you may have that we can incorporate. But for now, we'll just look at doing a breakout that is similar to what we had done before, but maybe just not quite as detailed. But that way you have a sense of just overall, how are you doing?
And this is Wayla. I know that Ashley said this at the very beginning, but I just want to thank you all again for your pioneering work that you've done. Oh, there we go. That you guys are really continuing to help us in this process as we're going through this Go For It process and everything. And we just thank you so much for what you've done to be able to do that.
All right. Are there any final thoughts? If not, the next step, so we'll be sending you that IFSP list and your link and password on Monday. And then I'll invite you to the chatter. I think I'll post a survey in there about what will be meaningful in terms of the results. And we'll be in touch. All right. Thanks again, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Stop recording. That round button again.